Hi, welcome to lesson 7 of our Primavera P6 training. Today we're going to be looking at how to create and assign calendars to our project activities, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. Of course, don't forget that in Primavera P6 you are at liberty to create the type of calendar that you're going to be using, depending on exactly what type of calendar you want to use. Say, for example, you want to do a 6-day work week calendar, or you want to do a 7-day work week calendar. And then don't forget, you can also tweak the working hours to reflect the reality on ground. In other words, to reflect exactly what your project is all about. So all of these are some of the things we're going to be covering in this very topic. Okay, so if you're ready, let's dive in. Okay, this is a project we've been working on for some time now. And remember, the last topic we discussed how to create relationships, and not just how to create relationships, but then also how to schedule our projects to be able to display the activities on the critical path, which is this ones you see in red colors. And like I mentioned earlier on, we're going to be discussing how to create an assigned calendar in this very lesson. However, before we do that, before we begin to create an assigned calendar, I want to quickly touch on one very important topic. And the topic I want to touch on is what we refer to as constraints. So I'm going to be talking about constraints. So in Primavera P6, there are two major types of constraints. We can constrain our activities. In other words, these single activities that we have already displayed in our timeline. So in other words, we can actually constrain project activities. Aside from constraining project activities, we can also constrain the totality of the project. So what the constraints basically does for us is it helps us to give our project a real world scenario. It helps us to create a particular set of attributes for our project that will enable it to reflect what the reality is. And that's what one topic I want to quickly cover before I begin to talk about the creation of the calendar, and then also talking about the calendar in detail. So let's quickly talk about how to create and then also how to assign constraints in Primavera P6. Alright, so talking about constraints, to assign constraints to your project activities, if you click on the status tab in the detail view, don't forget, if your status tab is not displaying, remember how we display tabs. Simply right click on any of those tabs and then go to customize, and then of course we discussed this in the previous lesson. Then choose whatever tabs you want to display, and then of course click on the single arrow to add it, and then click on apply, and then click on OK. So that's how to display your tabs. So if you click on the status tab, if you look within the status portion, that is, if you look at the center of that particular status tab, you're going to see a constraint portion. Don't forget, you can always raise your detail view just in case this constraint portion is not displayed or is not showing conspicuously. So you can see our constraints portion here. So from the constraints portion, you can see here, you will notice that Primavera for our activities has different types of constraints. So we have the primary constraint, and then we also have the secondary constraint. So we're going to be looking at each of these constraints and exactly what they stand for, so that we'll be able to understand how to use them in Primavera P6, and that's exactly what we are going to be looking at right away. So if you take a look, let's say for example we have an activity. Part of the things that the constraint does for us is the fact that it helps us to be able to clearly delineate activities and then give it a real life scenario. So let's say this activity, which is design building layout, you can see from my own schedule that design building layout, I've been able to create the duration, and then also by scheduling it, I have a start date of 22nd of October, and then also a finish date of 2nd of November. However, for some activities, you may have what we call a must start date or a must finish date for that very activity. Say, for example, a management puts a constraint on a certain activity and says, hey, Jack, Albalim, I need you to finish this very activity on so and so date. So if I select that particular activity, I go to my constraints portion. Remember, in the status tab under the constraint portion, you're going to see primary constraint there. So if I click on the drop down for primary constraint, you see the various options that I have there. So some of the options I have include, as late as possible, finish on or after, finish on or before, mandatory finish, mandatory start, and then start on. And then if I scroll down, there's also start on or after, and then also start on or before. So if I select any of these constraints, one key thing you notice about these constraints is that some of them are closed-ended constraints. For example, finish on. So if we say finish on, that's a closed-ended constraint, or we say start on, or mandatory start, mandatory finish. All of these are closed-ended constraints. However, there are some open-ended constraints. For example, finish on or after. Finish on or after when exactly? Or finish on or before when exactly? So that's part of the reason why we have both the primary constraint as well as the secondary constraint. So basically what the secondary constraint does is that it helps us to put a definition to those open-ended constraints. So if, for example, I select for this activity, which is design building layout, I select finish on or after, you will notice that it will bring up the finish date for that very activity already, which is 2nd of November. And one key thing you may also notice is that the moment you assign a constraint, Primavera puts an asterisk on that particular activity to show you that, yes, this activity has a constraint assigned to it. So let's say for this activity, we're saying it must finish on or after 2nd of November, but then we need to now define that after. So after, it could have as well be at the end of the project. So we need to know exactly what the after refers to. So that's essentially what the secondary constraint does for us. So we go to the secondary constraint portion, and then we now select finish on or before. So we can select a week later than the 2nd of November, which is the finish date for this activity. So if I select that date, so what I'm saying here inadvertently is the fact that this activity, which is design building layout, can finish on the 2nd of November, but no later than 9th of November. And that's exactly, what I've been able to assign to this activity. So you can see this is an open-ended constraint. Then I can also use a closed-ended constraint. So let me say for my design building, I have a mandatory finish date. So I simply go to my constraint part, that's the primary constraint, and I select a mandatory finish, which is 2nd of November in this case. And then you notice that my secondary constraint is no longer highlighted because this is a closed-ended constraint. Don't forget, for some project activities, you may have a date, mandatory finish date that is different from the, finish date of that very activity. All you simply need to do is to click on the browse button in the date portion below, and then you select the mandatory finish date for, that singular activity, okay? Which is exactly, what happens in this case. So what we have just done right now is how to assign constraint to project activities. So we've been able to assign an open-ended constraint and then also a closed-ended constraint. So you can decide which of these constraints you feel is best for you, especially with respect to an activity. So if an activity has a mandatory start date or must finish on date, or finish on after, so you can decide exactly how to assign these constraints. Now, aside from assigning constraints to activities, which is what we just did, we can also assign constraints to the project in totality. So all we simply need to do is we navigate to the project window by clicking on the project tab, which is already displayed as a tab here at the top. Or don't forget, you can also navigate to your project tab here. So if I select, you can also navigate to the project tab from your directory bar by clicking on project, and then it also brings you to that window. So select the project in question. In this case, is our MFE project. So to assign constraint to the MFE project, all you now need to do is you go to the date tab, which is in the detail view, and then of course under the must finish by, you now click on the browse button, and you can see this project was supposed to finish in this case on the 18th of February 2019. That's for my own project. So however, there could be some projects that have a must finish date. Say, for example, a wedding project. So you've already fixed a date. Say, on the, Valentine's Day, that's 14th of February, as the case may be. So this project must finish on the 14th of February as it is. So you can select 14th of February and then you click on select. So once you do that, you have also assigned a must finish date to that very project in totality, which is, what we have just done in this case. So changing some of these durations, of course, is going to affect certain things in your P6, and then may also affect, some of the project activities on the critical part, and then also may even result in you having what we now refer to as negative float. So if I navigate back to my activities page now, okay, so let me add my float column so that you can see what we're talking about. So simply right click and then click on columns, and then go to available options, and then click on find and type in float. Then hit enter on your keyboard, and then we're looking for total float. Okay, so good. So total float is what we're looking at. So you can close this and double click on total float to add it to one of your columns. So let me bring the total float as the very last column here. So I click on OK. All right, so you can see my total float column displays here. So one key thing you may have noticed from the total float column is the fact that the activities on the critical part, which is these activities that you see in red color, are all, the floats. Usually the float for activities on the critical part, that's these ones you see in red, you can see they are all 0, 0, 0. In other words, activities on the critical part has 0 float. Of course, float simply means how long an activity, total float simply means how long an activity can be delayed without affecting the finish date of the project. That's what we refer to as total float. So also understand that those activities that are on the non-critical part, you can see, for example, activity, plumbing design has a 3-day float here. You can see it there. That's this activity. Then also plan procurement has a 50-day float, and then advertise for bid 50-day float, and the rest of them. So this float simply illustrates how long these activities can any of these activities can be delayed without affecting the finish date of the project. Okay, so remember we just constrained this our project, which was supposed to finish on the 18th of November, and we said, okay, for the purpose of this exercise, that we are going to be finishing the project on the, we put a must finish date of 14th, which was supposed to finish on the 18th of February rather, but then we put a must finish date of 14th of February. So if I go back to my activities now, look at the information you have in this float. If I go back to my activities now, and then I schedule this activity by clicking on schedule. So if I click on schedule and I click on the schedule tab, for example, so if I click on the schedule tab, so you notice that some of these activities that hitherto were not on the critical part, for example, the plumbing design, becomes a critical activity. And not just that, some of those other activities also begin to have a negative float. In other words, it simply means that this M&E design, we need to get an additional 3 days, or we should look for how to get a 3-day duration. Also design approval, we need to get a 3-day duration. So all of these other ones that used to have 50-day float, you notice that they've all reduced to about 47 days. And then some other activities here also have negative floats, and more activities are now on the critical part than we used to have initially. So that's one key thing that the floats that assigning a must finish date does for you. And if the must finish date is lesser than the planned finish date for that particular project, you would notice that the activities would have more of negative float. However, if the must finish date is greater than the planned finish date of your project activities, most of your activities are not going to be on the critical path. So that's essentially about the constraints, and so you decide exactly when to use them, and then also how to use them. Okay, so now that we've talked about the constraint, how to constrain our activities, and then also how to constrain the project. So next we're going to talk about how to create the calendar. So if you were paying attention when we were starting during the course of the introduction of this very training, I made mention of the fact that there's a particular menu which we use in creating whatever we want to create, and that's the enterprise menu. So we're going to talk about how to create calendars and then also how to assign calendars in project. If you remember earlier on, especially when we were starting this class, I made mention of the fact that whenever we want to create anything, it's best we start from the enterprise menu. So if I click on enterprise, and then I click on calendars. So when I click on calendars, it brings up the calendars in a window for me. So notice that there are 3 calendar categories here. You have the global calendar. Of course, the global calendar simply talks about the calendar that can be applied to the totality of the project. So in this global calendar, notice that my corporate full-time calendar is checked under the default. So it simply means that my default calendar is the corporate standard full-time calendar. That means that any project at all that I am creating will run on this corporate full-time calendar. And that's why it's the default calendar. So if I want to change it, all I simply need to do is I select that calendar and then I check default, okay? So the default, calendar is basically the one that is checked under this very default column. Okay, good. Now, also there is a resource calendar. Resource calendar, a calendar for your resource persons. So you can see, just for the purpose of this, you can see I already have some resources and then also created a special calendar for them. Then there's also the project calendar. You can create a calendar for a specific project that you have in your Primavera P6, and that's what the project calendar does for us. All right, so let's go back to the global calendar. So at the global calendar, if we want to create our own calendar, from the calendars window, we can now click on the add button. So if you click on the add button, it will ask you to select a calendar to copy from. So in this case, we're going to be selecting the corporate standard full-time calendar. So you click on the corporate standard full-time calendar. Either you double click on it or you click on it and click on the select button. So the moment you do that, it creates a portion for you titled new calendar. So in that new calendar portion, enter the name of the calendar you want to create. So let's say, for example, we're creating a 6-day work week calendar because we work 6 days a week. So we have 6-day work. We have 6 days work week calendar. Okay, so we have just created a 6-day work week calendar. So you hit enter. So you've just created a 6-day work week calendar. But then notice that even though we created a 6-day work week calendar, because we copied the corporate standard full-time calendar, which is a 5-day work week calendar with 8 hours work per day, this our 6-day work week calendar would also be a 5-day, work week calendar in line with the corporate standard full-time calendar, because that's exactly what we copied. So once we have done this, the next thing is now to tweak our calendar to reflect exactly what we want. So the next thing we now need to do is we click on the modify button. So when you click on the modify button, you will notice that your 6-day work week calendar shows that Sunday as well as Saturdays are non-working days. So that's why you can see that they are both Sunday and Saturday are grayed out. But then of course Monday to Friday are working days, which of course re-emphasizes what I said earlier, that because we copied the standard corporate full-time calendar, that's still going to be a 5-day work week calendar. So but this time around we need to make Saturday a working day, because we're creating a 6-day work week calendar. So there are 2 ways we can do that. We can do it from the total work hours per day or from the detailed work hours per day. So if we decide to do it from the total work hours per day, all we simply now need to do is we make sure you're selecting the total work hours per day, and then go to what we refer to as your work week. So if you click on the work week, it brings up your calendar weekly work hours, which in this case you're seeing 8 hours from Mondays to Friday, and then of course because we don't work on Saturdays and Sundays, you're seeing 0 there. So I could simply remove the 0 I have for Saturday and then enter 8 there. So the moment I enter 8 there and I click OK, you will notice that this gray that we have under Saturday would disappear. So watch what happens. So when I click OK, you can see that the gray for Saturday disappears. So it simply means that I have created a 6-day work week calendar, and then I can now click on OK. So this is now a 6-day work week calendar with 8-hour work per day. All right. I can also decide to create another calendar. In this case, I want to edit the working hours. So let's say I'm creating another 6-day work week calendar. So I click on add. Then because I've already created a 6-day work week calendar, or let's still go back to the corporate standard calendar. So I select the corporate standard calendar, which is what I'm copying from. And then let's say I have, I'm going to call this a special 6-day work week calendar. Okay, good. So this is a special 6-day work week calendar. All right, so now let me modify this 6-day work week calendar now. So if I click on modify, you notice that we saw this type of page earlier on where we were on a total, work hours per day. And what we simply did is we went to work week and we changed Saturday to 8 hours. But then I told you that there's another way we can do this. We can also do it from the detailed work hours per day. So I can select detailed work hours per day, and then if you look, the moment I check this, it brings up this for me. So notice that there are some grayed portions, and then there are also some parts that are not grayed out. So all of these represent a 30 minutes duration, starting from 00 hours to 12:30. And then also that's 12:30 a.m. Then the second portion represents 12:30 a.m. to 12:60 a.m. Then the next one is from 1 a.m. to 1:30, and then the next is from 1:30 to 1:60 in that particular order. So in essence, each of these boxes represents a 30 minutes duration. That's essentially what each of these boxes represent. So if you look at it clearly now, you can see that from 8 a.m. it is no longer grayed out. So that means that work starts 8 a.m. and then ends at 4 p.m. That's the second side of 15. 15 is 3. But then remember, I told you each box represents a 30 minutes duration. So the first box here is from 3 to 3:30 p.m. and then the second box here is from 3:30 p.m. to 3:60 p.m., which is equivalent to 4 p.m. So it simply means that for this very project or for this very calendar, work starts 8 a.m. and then closes at 4 p.m. But then let's say, for example, we want to make, or of course, in this case, we want to make Saturday a working day, and that's why we selected the detailed work hours per day. So if we now go to work week, you'll notice that in the work week portion, our calendar hours is now what is displaying. So if I select Saturday, for example, so let's say Saturday work starts at 10 a.m. instead of 8 a.m. Of course, because this is on a Saturday, or because this is on a Saturday, for example. And then work for Saturdays end at 7 p.m. Like we're using this as an example. So all we simply need to do is we select the, first portion of 10 a.m., then hold back the shift button, and we select the second portion of 6 p.m. That's 18 hours. Okay, good. So once we've selected that, we can click on work. So if I click on work, it removes the gray. So you can see now that work starts in this case on Saturday 10 a.m. up until 7 p.m., which is what I've just done. So once I've done that, I can click on OK, and you notice that the gray for Saturday here disappears. So if I go to any day, you can see for any day for Friday, Thursday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Monday, you can see work starts 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. But if I click on any date on Saturday, you now notice that work starts at 10 a.m. and then of course finishes at 7 p.m. That's basically what we have just done. Then also don't forget that you could also put into consideration break hours. So if, for example, on each of these days we have breaks, so I can simply also go back again to my work week. And let's say for Monday to Friday, we have breaks between 12 to 1 p.m. So I select Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And then I select the 2 halves that by holding down the shift button or the control button, whichever. Then I click on non-work. So what I've simply done for this my calendar is that for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then as well as Friday, work starts 8 a.m. ends 4 p.m. But then there's 1 hour break between 12 noon and 1 p.m. So let's say on Saturday there's a 1 hour break between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. So I select, the 2 halves of 14, and then I click on non-work. It simply makes it that, on Saturday there's also 1 hour break between 10 a.m. as well as there's also 1 hour break at 2 p.m. which is what we have just illustrated. So if I click on OK, you notice that these changes will take effect for each of the days that you have within your calendar, not minding the year or the month as the case may be. Okay, so another very important thing you need to also put into consideration is public holidays. So say for example, our project has a public holiday on the 25th of December for Christmas. Let's say 25th and 26th of December. So you click on 25th and then hold down your shift button and click on the 26th and then click on, all you simply need to do is you click on non-work. So that means we are saying that 25th and 26th of December is a non-working day because we're going to be observing it for Christmas. So that's exactly what we have just done in this situation. Okay, so we've learned how to create our calendar. We learned how to do it at the total work hours per day, and then we also did it from the detailed work hours per day. And then each of these essentially helps us to be able to create a calendar. So once you're done, we now click on OK. So I've created a 6-day work week calendar. I also created another one, which is a special 6-day work week calendar, where I tweaked the working hours, and there you can also decide to make changes to your working hours depending on the peculiarity of the type of project, and then also how exactly your organization operates or runs project as it is. So remember I told you that these are global calendars, and so these calendars here can be applied to the totality of the project. I can also create resource calendars. So say for example, I want to create a resource calendar for the project manager. And then of course, all I simply need to do as usual is I click on the add button. Now, one of the key things it will ask me to do is to select a resource. Okay. However, we have not created resources yet. So what I'm simply going to do is I'm going to select any random resource at all from Primavera for the purpose of this exercise. But usually before you can create a resource calendar, you need to have created at least one resource person for that very project so that you could use it to create your resource calendar. So let me change the filter. I'm going to display all, resources that I have in my P6. And then in all of these resources, I am going to select a particular resource person which I've created in the past. So let's say I'm going to select Obalim. That's my name. Okay. So I click on assign. So I'm going to create Obalim's calendar now, which is a resource person. So let's say Obalim works 3 days a week. Yeah. So if I select Obalim, I can click on the modify button. So it brings up this, resource calendars for me. And then all I simply need to do is, since Obalim works 3 days a week, that is Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, all I simply need to do is I make Tuesdays and Thursdays non-working days for him. I could do that from the total work hours per day or from the detailed work hours per day if I have a need to change his working hours. But then let's keep it simple. So if I do it from the total work hours per day, all I simply need to do is, again, I go to work week, and then he's not working on Tuesday. So on Tuesday, I change that to 0. And then he's also not working on Thursday. So for Thursday, I also change that to 0. And then I click on OK. So the moment I do that, you notice that Tuesday, Thursday are all grayed out. So Obalim only works Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. and then I click on OK. So the exciting thing is any activity that Oberlin is now assigned to would automatically run on that calendar. So Primavera usually assigns, a specific resource calendar to an activity where the resource person is assigned to, or if hitherto a particular calendar has not been assigned to that very activity. And don't forget, I can also create a project calendar. Say I want to create a calendar for my MFE project so that I will know this is exclusive to manufacturing facility expansion project. So again, I check project calendar, and then I click on add. I copy the corporate full-time calendar, and then I title this MFE calendar. So let's say in my MFE calendar, work starts at 8 a.m. and then closes at 6 p.m. for example, for this very project, and then we work 7 days a week. So all I simply now need to do is I modify this calendar, and I go to detailed work hours, and then I click on work week. So since we work 7 days a week, and for each day a week work starts 8 a.m. so I select 8 a.m. and then hold down my shift button, and then up until 6 p.m. that's the other side of 17, and so I click on work. So I also do same for Monday. Work starts 8 a.m. so I select the first side of 8 a.m. and then the second side of 17, and then I also click work. So I can also do that by selecting all the days that I have there. That's from Tuesday to Saturday. And then I select 8 a.m., which is when work starts. Hold on my shift button, select the second side of 17, and then I click on work. So what I've simply done, you'll notice, is for each of these days, work starts 8 a.m. and then ends 6 p.m. and then we work 7 days a week. So if I click on OK, you will notice that the grid for Saturday and Sunday will disappear, meaning this is a 7-day work week calendar. Work starts at 8 a.m. and closes at 6 p.m. and then I click on OK. So that's the peculiarity of the calendar that I have just created, which is the MFE, project calendar, and that's exactly what I have just done. So once you're done with that, you can click on close. But one exciting thing you need to understand about this calendar is that if I want to make this MFE calendar, I could simply click on to global. So it will now take this MFE calendar and make it a global calendar. Then also for your resource calendars, after creating your resource calendars, one thing you also need to be wary of, or one thing you also need to know, is that it's necessary to share the resource calendar, because when you begin to assign calendar to resources in your project, it can only pick shared calendars. So this Oberlin calendar I've created, I want to share it, so I click on to shared. To ask me if I want to convert this calendar to a shared resource calendar, I select yes. So this becomes a shared resource calendar. So it therefore means that I can access this calendar from any other project that I'm creating. So I can now click on close. Okay, good. So we just learned how to create calendars, and then also how to create different types of calendars. And then, of course, based on each of those categories, including the project calendar, the resource calendar, as well as the global calendar. So next, we're going to learn how to assign the calendars. So to assign the calendars, one way we can do that is to display our calendar column. Of course, don't forget to display your column as usual. You can click on column from the tools bar. So when you click on column on the tools bar, go to available options and then click on find and type in calendar. Okay, so yeah, so that's calendar. So simply double click on the calendar to add it. So you can see it has been added as part of my columns. So I want it to be just before my total float, and then I click on OK. So you can see that the calendar column here displays. So one key thing you may have noticed here with respect to my calendar is the fact that all of these activities are on the corporate full-time calendar, just like I explained to you earlier on. Because this was the default calendar while I was creating this project, that's why all the activities are running on, corporate standard, full-time calendar, which is exactly what you're seeing right now. Okay, good. Let's now say that for some of these activities, they would run on a separate calendar. So if I want to change the calendar, all I simply need to do is for that activity, I double click within the calendar cell under the calendar column. And then of course it will ask it to, this is displaying global calendar. So let's say M&E design is going to run on the 6-day work week calendar that I created. So I select the 6-day work week calendar and then I assign it so you can see these changes. Then let's also say that the plumbing is going to run on the special 6-day work week calendar. So when I double click, it brings up the assign calendar window. So I select the special 6-day work week calendar and then I assign. And then let's say that design approval is going to run on the MFE calendar. So I go to the filter portion under the display and then I select project calendars and then I select the MFE calendar and then I assign. So you can see it changes this to MFE calendar. And then of course as you do this, it's going to be affecting the project duration as well, or the activities, and then of course it assigns. So if for example I want to do this for a combination of activities, so all I simply need to do is I select for the first activity the calendar I want it to run on. So let me go back to my global calendar. So I want it to run on the trades 6-day work week calendar. And so let's say the other activities below it, all of them I want them to now run on this trades 5-day work week calendar. So I simply need to do is I select all the activities that are below and then I now click on Control E. You can simply click on Control E, or you go to edit and select fill down. Yes, you go to edit and select fill down. That's your Control E. So if I do that, you can see it changes all of these activities to trades 5-day work week calendar. So we've learned how to create a calendar and then also how to assign specific calendars or different calendars to project activities, which is what we have just done now. You can also do this for the project. So if I want to change the calendar that the project is currently running on, I simply navigate back to the project window and then select my MFE project, and then I go to default tab in the detail view, and then of course you're going to see calendar here. So remember, this is a corporate standard full-time calendar, which was the default calendar. So I can click on the browse button and then now select the filter and then go to project calendars and assign my MFE calendar to this very project. So that means that subsequent activities I'm going to create for this MFE manufacturing facility expansion project is now going to run on the MFE calendar and no longer on the corporate standard calendar. Okay, so in this very lesson, we first of all started by talking about constraints. So we created constraints for activities. We also created constraints for project. And then after that, we also learned how to create calendars, the global calendar. Then also we talked about the resource calendar and then also the project calendar. And then we also learned how to assign calendars to activities, and then also how to assign calendar to project. I hope this particular video has been very informative for you.